It's very good.
When you walk through Jeannie Williams' sunny orchard, you don't notice anything wrong, but the problem's there, underfoot. The land around her, about 250 square kilometers, is sinking.
We get everything from the well, and I know that the water is clean. We don't have problems with E. coli and things like that because it comes straight from the ground.
Her well is small and shallow, but this is California's Central Valley, which produces about a quarter of America's food supply and a large part of the $3.5 billion worth of produce that California exports to Canada. For more than a century, farmers have been pumping water out of the ground. So much so, the land around here is slowly sinking, a process known as subsidence. In less than 100 years, it's dropped 8.5 meters.
That's frightening because it may not come back. If we do get a good water year, is the land going to come back up?
Corcoran, the self-proclaimed farming capital of California. No coincidence, it's also the state's subsidence capital. For years, NASA has used satellites to measure how far the ground is sinking. The darker the color, the more the land has sunk. That dark purple area centered around Corcoran, all farm country.
Some areas actually are sinking 1 to 2 feet a year. So, that's a huge amount.
And the region's already feeling the effects. Groundwater hydrologist Michelle Sneed says this was a wet year, and still the ground sank more than 2.5 centimeters.
That's still quite a bit.
It is quite a bit when you're talking about the impact to canals.
Like this one, the Friant-Kern Canal. It's a 250-kilometer long aqueduct that delivers water to 15,000 farms. But the system depends on gravity, and the ground has sunk so much in some spots, the water now has to travel uphill, basically turning the canal into a deep pool.
It can only transmit about 40% of the water that it was designed to transmit.
Subsidence doesn't just affect infrastructure like bridges, roads, and canals. It also reduces the ability of the earth itself to store water. And once that capacity is lost, experts say, you can't get it back.
But the problems don't end there. In the tiny community of Allensworth, no one dares drink from the tap. Israel Sanchez spends about $200 a month on bottled water.
This is what we had to go buying all the time in the town.
And so the water that basically goes to your house here,
yes.
you can't drink that?
No.
That's because the water's dangerously polluted with arsenic. Subsidence is kind of like squeezing a sponge. The sinking ground presses contaminants like arsenic out of the soil and into the groundwater. 10% of wells tested in this agricultural hotspot have shown dangerous levels of arsenic. And just across from Sanchez's house, a cautionary tale. Historic Allensworth, in the early 1900s, a thriving African-American community. By the 1960s, an empty tourist attraction. One of the reasons this town was eventually abandoned? Arsenic.
More humans using the water not being replenished, and the concentrations are going to get higher. They did deem the wells in the 60s as poisonous and undrinkable.
With the added threat of drought due to climate change, experts say more needs to be done to curb water use right now, or the ground will keep sinking and the aquifers will keep shrinking.
The farmers now are coming to terms with that, and that they may have to pump less.
There we go.
But many farmers say that's not likely unless the state of California builds more reservoirs. Until then,
farmers have no choice but to pump it out of the ground. That or we don't grow crops, and people need to eat.
You don't have to go far to look for proof. Just next door, her neighbor is digging a new well for his farm. It's big and it's deep. Kim Brunhuber, CBC News, near Corcoran, California.